Your niece's identification is inappropriate for community facilities. Patricia Whitmore's manicured fingers drummed against her clipboard as she blocked my path to the Oakwood Heights pool gate. Military-dependent cards aren't recognized forms of identification here. I stopped walking and looked directly into her cold blue eyes. I designed the security protocols for military-dependent ID systems. That card has better encryption than your community access system. The smugness flickered from her face for just a moment. If you've ever felt that surge of power when standing up to bullies, hit subscribe now. This showdown is about to become a masterclass in fighting back. I'm Marcus Thompson, and I spend my days protecting classified networks from the world's most sophisticated cyber threats. What Patricia didn't know was that my expertise in digital forensics and security analysis made me very, very good at spotting patterns others missed, including the systematic targeting I was starting to see in her violation notices. This violation is about my 13-year-old niece, Zara, I continued, keeping my voice level, the girl whose father died serving this country in Afghanistan, the same brother who bought this house specifically because Oakwood Heights welcomed military families. Patricia's jaw tightened. Community safety requires... Community safety? I pulled out my phone and showed her the violation notice. You're demanding documentation that violates federal privacy laws for military dependents. You're also requiring approval for identification that's already federally validated. Zara stood behind me, clutching her towel, confusion and hurt written across her young face. She'd already endured enough loss for someone her age. Losing her dad overseas, moving in with her uncle, starting at a new school. The last thing she needed was some power-hungry HOA president, making her feel unwelcome in the one place that was supposed to be home. The board voted on discriminatory policies. I stepped closer, and Patricia actually took a step back. I've reviewed the HOA bylaws. Nothing in there gives you authority to invalidate federal identification. This wasn't just about pool access. This was about belonging, about the promise I'd made to my dying brother that Zara would have a stable, supportive community, about the memorial garden he'd planted in our backyard where he'd dreamed of teaching his daughter to swim in this very pool. Patricia recovered her composure quickly. Mr. Thompson, if you can't comply with reasonable community standards, I'll comply with legal standards, I interrupted, but I'll also document every violation of federal fair housing law I encounter. Her eyes narrowed. Are you threatening me? I'm informing you that your actions are being observed by someone who understands systems. I smiled coldly. All kinds of systems. Drop a like if you've ever wanted to stand up to unreasonable rules like this, and subscribe to see how this strategy plays out. As we walked away, Zara finally spoke. Uncle Marcus, why does she hate us? She doesn't hate us, sweetheart. She's afraid of us. I put my arm around her shoulders. Some people think power comes from making others small. They don't understand that real power comes from protecting the people who matter. But as I watched Patricia march back toward the HOA office, her phone already pressed to her ear, I knew this was just the beginning. She'd made a critical error, though. She'd picked a fight with someone who spent every day identifying threats, analyzing patterns, and building airtight cases against people who thought they were untouchable. What Patricia couldn't have known was that in my line of work, you learn to see corruption from a mile away. The inconsistent enforcement, the targeting of specific demographics, the way she'd avoided putting her demands in writing until now. These weren't random power trips. They were part of a pattern, and I was very, very good at following patterns to their source. The next morning, I decided to observe Patricia's methods more systematically. I arrived at the community pool 30 minutes before it opened, positioning myself at a picnic table where I could watch the entrance while appearing to work on my laptop. What I witnessed over the next 2 hours confirmed my worst suspicions. The first family to arrive was the Rodriguez clan, Maria, her husband Carlos, and their 15-year-old son Diego. I'd met them briefly at the last community barbecue. Carlos was a Marine Corps logistics coordinator stationed at Quantico, and Diego attended a military prep academy. Patricia emerged from the HOA office like a hawk spotting prey. "Excuse me," she called out, clipboard in hand. "I need to see identification for your son." Maria looked confused. "We have our pool passes." "Not pool passes, government identification. Your son appears to be using unauthorized credentials." Diego held up his military prep school ID, the kind issued to students in ROTC programs. "This is my school ID, ma'am." "Unacceptable." Patricia made a dramatic show of writing on her clipboard. Military Academy identification requires special community approval. You'll need to submit Form 47B for student military credential verification. Carlos stepped forward, his voice carefully controlled. Ma'am, that's his high school ID. He's 15. Community safety protocols don't recognize military-affiliated identification without proper documentation. Patricia's tone dripped with false authority. The family is suspended from pool privileges pending compliance. I watched the Rodriguez family walk away. Diego's shoulders slumped in embarrassment. My jaw clenched as I typed notes into my encrypted file. 20 minutes later, the Patterson family approached, civilian resident. S, whose kids attended the local public school. Patricia waved them through without even asking for identification. Then came the Washingtons. Army Captain Jennifer Washington, her husband Mike, and their twin daughters. Patricia intercepted them before they reached the gate. Military families require enhanced screening, Patricia announced. I'll need to see dependency verification for your children. Enhanced screening? Jennifer's voice carried the crisp authority of someone accustomed to command. Since when? New policy as of this month. Military dependents present unique security considerations for community facilities. Mike Washington pulled out his phone. I'd like to see this policy in writing. All policies are available through proper HOA channels, Patricia replied smoothly. Until you provide the required documentation, access is restricted. I watched another military family turn away, their daughters asking why they couldn't swim like their friends. As Patricia strutted back toward her office, she stopped at a nearby table where a woman in expensive activewear was waiting. I recognized her from community events, someone involved in local real estate, though I'd never caught her name. The Rodriguez house will be available soon, Patricia said quietly, but not quietly enough. Military families never stay long once they understand the community standards. Perfect location for my clients, the woman replied. Below market value? Significantly. Nobody wants the hassle of military relocations and deployments affecting property values. My fingers stopped typing. There it was, the financial motive behind the systematic harassment. I pulled up the county assessor's website on my laptop, cross-referencing recent property sales in Oakwood Heights. The pattern emerged quickly. Houses previously owned by military families were selling for 15 to 20% below comparable civilian-owned properties in the same neighborhood. Patricia wasn't just discriminating against military families. She was actively working to depress their property values, creating opportunities for specific buyers while forcing service members to sell at losses. I opened my secure work VPN and began accessing professional databases. My security clearance allowed me to run background checks that most people couldn't access. Within minutes, I had Patricia's full professional history, property ownership records, and business associations. Pinnacle Development Group appeared repeatedly in her financial records. Recent property purchases, consulting fees, and what looked suspiciously like kickback payments disguised as community enhancement bonuses. I photographed every interaction, time-stamped each violation of fair housing law, and documented the discriminatory pattern with the methodical precision my job required. This wasn't random prejudice, it was systematic economic manipulation using housing discrimination as a weapon. By noon, I had enough evidence to file complaints with multiple federal agencies. But I wanted more than complaints. I wanted to destroy the entire corrupt system Patricia had built and ensure no military family would ever face this treatment again. That evening, I was grilling burgers in my backyard when David Chen appeared at my fence gate, looking like a man wrestling with his conscience. His usually neat appearance seemed disheveled, shirt wrinkled, hair uncombed, the kind of look that comes from sleepless nights. "Marcus, can we talk?" His voice carried a weight I hadn't heard before. "Of course. Come on through." I gestured toward my patio table, noting how his eyes darted toward the neighboring houses as if checking for surveillance. David settled into a chair but couldn't seem to get comfortable, shifting his weight and avoiding eye contact. "I heard about what happened with Zara at the pool yesterday. Word travels fast." Patricia called an emergency board conference call last night. His fingers drummed nervously against the table. She said military families were becoming a community disruption. I flipped a burger, keeping my expression neutral. "What's your take on that?" David was quiet for a long moment, staring at his hands. "My dad served in Korea, Purple Heart recipient. I did 8 years in the Army Reserves myself." He finally looked up, and I saw genuine anguish in his eyes. "I know what military families sacrifice, what they give up for this country. But I'm the HOA treasurer. I signed off on Patricia's enhanced security protocols without reading them carefully. His voice cracked slightly. I trusted her expertise on community management. I sat down across from him, recognizing the internal battle playing out on his face. What changed your mind? This morning I actually read the policies I approved. David pulled a folded paper from his pocket, his hands shaking slightly. Marcus, these aren't security measures. They're designed to make military families feel unwelcome. The paper was a printout of HOA Resolution 2024-7 titled Enhanced Community Safety Protocols for Military-Affiliated Residents. Reading it felt like examining malware code, seemingly legitimate language hiding malicious intent. Section 4 requires military dependents to register biometric data with HOA security, I read aloud. That's illegal under federal privacy laws for military families. I know that now. David's voice was barely above a whisper. Section 6 gives Patricia authority to conduct lifestyle compatibility assessments for families with government employment. Government employment meaning military service. It gets worse. David leaned forward conspiratorially. I started reviewing our financial records after the call last night. Patricia's been receiving payments from something called Pinnacle Development Group, $25,000 over the past 6 months. My pulse quickened. Consulting fees? That's what she labeled them. But Marcus, we don't have any development projects that would require outside consulting. David's military training was showing now, his voice taking on the clipped precision of someone reporting critical intelligence. I cross-referenced those payments with property sales in the neighborhood, and every house that sold below market value in the past year belonged to a military family. Every single one. He pulled out his phone, showing me a spreadsheet he'd created. Average loss per family, $43,000. I studied the data, my cybersecurity analyst mind immediately recognizing the pattern. She's running a systematic operation to depress military property values. Worse than that, David's voice dropped to barely audible. I found email exchanges between Patricia and Pinnacle Development. They're not just buying the undervalued properties, they're coordinating the harassment that forces the sales. The implications hit me like a physical blow. She's weaponizing the HOA to steal equity from military families. I've been complicit in financial fraud and housing discrimination. David put his head in his hands. I swore an oath to defend this country, and I've been helping someone steal from the families who serve it. You didn't know. I should have known. His voice carried the steel of military conviction. I was lazy, and my laziness hurt good people. I watched David transform before my eyes, the conflict resolving into determination. This was what I'd been hoping for, an inside ally with both access and motivation. David, if you want to make this right, I need your help. He straightened up, looking me directly in the eye for the first time since arriving. What do you need? Access to all HOA financial records, email communications, board meeting minutes, everything. That's a lot of confidential information. It's evidence of federal crimes, I corrected. Housing discrimination, mail fraud, conspiracy to commit financial fraud. Patricia isn't just violating HOA rules, she's violating federal law. David nodded slowly. My access codes work until midnight tonight before the system logs reset. Then we better get started. The certified mail envelope arrived at 7:30 a.m., delivered with the kind of official weight that demanded immediate attention. I signed for it while Zara ate her cereal, noting how the return address read, Oakwood Heights Homeowners Association, Legal Department. Legal Department. Patricia was escalating. Inside was a formal document printed on expensive letterhead, complete with notarized signatures and legal references that would intimidate most homeowners. The header read, Mandatory Compliance Notice, Community Security Verification. What's that, Uncle Marcus? Zara asked, looking up from her breakfast. Just HOA paperwork, sweetheart. Nothing for you to worry about. I kept my voice calm while my eyes scanned Patricia's latest overreach. The document was a masterpiece of bureaucratic intimidation disguised as legitimate authority. Patricia was demanding comprehensive documentation that would make any reasonable person question whether compliance was even possible. For Zara specifically, she wanted military dependent identification verification forms, proof of legal guardianship with federal authentication, medical records showing vaccination compliance, educational enrollment verification, and something called a community integration assessment to be conducted by Patricia personally. For me, the demands were even more invasive. Complete military service records for my deceased brother, proof of inheritance rights to the property, employment verification including security clearance documentate, financial records showing ability to maintain property values, and submission to a lifestyle compatibility review. The threat at the bottom was crystal clear. Failure to provide complete documentation within 72 hours will result in immediate suspension of all community privileges, potential legal action for trespass, and referral to appropriate county authorities regarding undocumented minor residents. Undocumented minor residents. She was threatening to call child services on a military orphan. I pulled out my phone and called my office. "This is Marcus Thompson. I need to take a personal day. Family emergency." 20 minutes later, I sat in Patricia's HOA office. The compliance notice spread across her desk between us. Her assistant had tried to schedule an appointment for next week, but I'd made it clear that wouldn't work for anyone. "Mr. Thompson, I hope you've reviewed our security requirements," Patricia said, settling behind her desk with the satisfied expression of someone who believed they held all the cards. "I've reviewed your illegal demands, yes." I leaned back in my chair, projecting calm confidence while internally cataloging every detail for my growing case file. "Illegal?" Her laugh was sharp and condescending. "These are standard community safety protocols approved by our legal counsel. Show me the legal opinion that authorizes you to demand military service records from deceased veterans." Patricia's smile flickered slightly. Community security requires compliance with federal law," I interrupted, "which your demands violate in at least 6 different ways." "Mr. Thompson, I understand you're upset about the new protocols, but I'm upset about systematic housing discrimination disguised as security theater." I pulled out my phone and opened the recording app, placing it clearly on her desk. "Do you consent to this conversation being recorded?" "That won't be necessary." Patricia's voice sharpened, and she pushed a button on her desk phone. "Janet, please come in here." Her assistant entered with a notepad, clearly prepared to document our conversation from Patricia's perspective. "Mr. Thompson, your attitude suggests you're not committed to community harmony," Patricia continued, her tone shifting to formal authority. "Residents who can't adapt to neighborhood standards often find themselves happier elsewhere. Are you suggesting military families don't belong in Oakwood Heights? I'm suggesting that residents with demanding career obligations and frequent relocations sometimes struggle with community integration." Patricia's words were carefully chosen, designed to sound reasonable while conveying her discriminatory intent. "My brother bought this house because Oakwood Heights welcomed military families. That was 18 months ago. Community needs evolve. Property values require careful curation." Patricia opened a thick folder on her desk. "I have documentation of numerous complaints about military-affiliated residents." "From whom?" "Community feedback is confidential." I stood up, having heard enough to confirm my suspicions. "Patricia, you have 72 hours to withdraw these illegal demands." "Or what?" "Or you'll discover that some military families have resources you didn't expect." I picked up my phone, ending the recording. "I'll be filing complaints with the Department of Housing and Urban Development, the Federal Trade Commission, and the State Attorney General's office." Patricia's confident facade cracked slightly. "Mr. Thompson, there's every need. You've made this personal by threatening my family." I headed toward the door, then paused. "You picked the wrong family to intimidate, Patricia. You're about to find out why." That night, I settled into my home office with 3 monitors, a secure VPN connection, and the kind of focused intense eye that had earned me a top-secret clearance. David's access codes had given me entry to the HOA's digital infrastructure, but what I discovered went far beyond simple financial irregularities. The first anomaly appeared in the email server logs. Patricia had been using encrypted communication channels that bypassed the standard HOA system, professional-grade encryption that suggested she understood she was conducting illegal business. I cracked her encryption within 20 minutes. Military-grade cybersecurity training has its advantages. The earliest messages dated back 8 months, establishing a coordinated campaign between Patricia and James Morrison from Pinnacle Development Group. Their communication revealed a systematic strategy to identify and target military families for property acquisition. Phase 1 complete, Patricia had written in March, identified 12 military-owned properties in prime locations, beginning selective enforcement protocols. Morrison's response chilled me. "Excellent. Our investors prefer 20–25% below market acquisition costs. Military families relocate frequently, so pressure campaigns should yield quick results. I downloaded every message, building a comprehensive timeline of their conspiracy. The evidence was damning. They'd specifically researched deployment schedules, family situations, and financial vulnerabilities of military residents. The Rodriguez family had been targeted because Carlos was scheduled for a 6-month deployment to Okinawa. Patricia knew Maria would struggle managing teenage Diego alone while dealing with HOA harassment. The Washington twins were being targeted because their father was transitioning out of active duty. Patricia understood that military families facing career changes were financially vulnerable and more likely to sell quickly. My family was the latest target because they'd identified Zara as a military dependent without parents, what they callously referred to as a documentation vulnerability they could exploit. But the financial records revealed the true scope of their opium. Patricia hadn't just received consulting fees from Pinnacle Development, she was receiving percentage-based payments for every property that sold below market value to their network of investors. Essentially, she was being paid bounties for destroying military families' financial security. The numbers were staggering. Over the past year, Patricia had cost military families in Oakwood Heights over $500,000 in lost equity. Money that should have gone toward children's college funds, retirement savings, or new home down payments had instead lined Patricia's pockets and enriched Pinnacle's investor network. I found detailed spreadsheets tracking each family's financial pressure points, deployment schedules, and estimated break points where harassment would force a sale. They'd turned housing discrimination into a profitable business model. The communication logs revealed Patricia's methods in disturbing detail. She'd researched federal privacy laws specifically to find ways to intimidate military families while staying just barely within legal boundaries. Her demands for military service records, dependent documentation, and security clearance information were calculated to create compliance nightmares that would exhaust families into submission. But Patricia had made a critical error in her research. She'd focused on intimidation tactics while ignoring federal enforcement mechanisms. She didn't understand that systematic housing discrimination created patterns that trained investigators could identify and prosecute. I began building a comprehensive evidence package, organizing the financial records, communication logs, and discriminatory policy documents into a format that federal prosecutors could use immediately. My cybersecurity background meant I understood chain of custody requirements, digital authentication, and the technical documentation needed to make electronic evidence admissible in court. At 2:47 a.m., I discovered the smoking gun buried in Patricia's personal email account. A message to Morrison, dated just 3 days ago. Thompson family investigation complete. Guardian is defense contractor with security clearance, potentially valuable for intimidation leverage. Recommend escalated pressure campaign using minor dependent as compliance focal point. They'd specifically researched my background to find ways to threaten my career and security clearance. Patricia understood that military contractors couldn't afford any appearance of legal complications, so she'd planned to use that vulnerability against both Zara and me. But her research had missed one crucial detail about my specific expertise. She knew I was a cybersecurity analyst, but she didn't know I specialized in financial crimes investigation and digital forensics. She'd unknowingly declared war on someone whose job was exposing exactly the kind of systematic fraud she was running. I compiled the final evidence package as dawn broke outside my window. Patricia's systematic discrimination wasn't just morally reprehensible, it was a federal crime with clear victims, documented damages, and a paper trail that led directly to her bank account. Time to take this evidence to people with badges and federal authority. The call came at 6:15 a.m., jolting me awake from the 3 hours of sleep I'd managed after compiling Patricia's evidence package. The caller ID showed Fairfax County Child Protective Services. Mr. Thompson, this is Sarah Martinez from CPS. We've received a report regarding the welfare and documentation status of a minor in your care. We need to schedule an immediate home visit. My blood ran cold. What kind of report? I can't discuss specifics over the phone, but the complaint alleges improper guardianship documentation and questions about the minor's legal status in the community. Patricia had actually done it. She'd weaponized Child Protective Services against a military orphan. I'll be available whenever you need, I managed, my voice steady despite the rage building in my chest. 2 hours later, Sarah Martinez sat at my kitchen table reviewing guardianship papers while Zara huddled beside me, confused and frightened. Sarah was professional but thorough, clearly taking the complaint seriously despite its suspicious timing. "The report suggests your niece may be residing here without proper documentation," Sarah explained gently. "Can you walk me through the guardianship arrangement?" I provided every document: court orders, military casualty notifications, Social Security Administration letters, school enrollment records. Everything was legitimate and properly filed, but I could see the bureaucratic wheels turning in Sarah's mind. "Mr. Thompson, your documentation appears complete," Sarah said after an hour of review. "However, the complaint also mentions community integration concerns and questions about stability." "What does that mean?" "The reporting party suggests that frequent disputes with neighborhood authorities might indicate an unstable environment for Zara." There it was, Patricia's masterpiece of manipulation. She'd positioned her systematic harassment as evidence that I was creating an unstable environment for my niece. "Ms. Martinez, I need to show you something." I pulled out my laptop and opened the evidence file I'd compiled. The neighborhood disputes are part of a systematic discrimination campaign against military families. Sarah's expression grew serious as I walked her through Patricia's communications, the financial records, and the coordinated harassment campaign. Her professional demeanor shifted to outrage as she realized how her agency was being manipulated. This is systematic fraud using our age. "And see as a weapon," Sarah said quietly. "Mr. Thompson, I need copies of everything you've shown me." Already prepared, I handed her an encrypted drive containing all the evidence. Patricia Whitmore has been using intimidation tactics specifically designed to create the appearance of instability for military families. After Sarah left with assurances that the complaint would be dismissed and investigated as potential false reporting, I sat in my kitchen staring at the formal CPS documentation. Patricia had crossed a line that transformed this from property harassment into something personal and unforgivable. She'd used the death of my brother, a Navy SEAL who died serving his country, as leverage to threaten the security and well-being of his orphaned daughter. This wasn't about HOA rules anymore. This wasn't about property values or community standards. Patricia had declared war on my family using the most vulnerable child in our community as her weapon. I called my supervisor at work. "I need to take emergency family leave." "Everything okay, Marcus?" "No, but it will be soon." I spent the rest of the morning on secure phone calls with federal agencies: the FBI's Civil Rights Division, the Department of Housing and Urban Development's Office of Fair Housing, and the Federal Trade Commission's Consumer Protection Bureau. Each agency took detailed reports and requested copies of my evidence package. But federal investigations take time, and Patricia was escalating her attacks daily. Zara couldn't endure weeks or months of systematic harassment while bureaucrats processed paperwork. I needed to accelerate the timeline. At noon, I made a decision that would either end Patricia's criminal enterprise immediately or destroy my own career. I opened my secure work terminal and began using every professional resource at my disposal to build an unassailable case against Patricia Whitmore. My security clearance gave me access to federal databases, financial crime analysis to OOLs, and investigative resources that most civilians couldn't access. I was about to use all of them to protect my family, regardless of the personal consequences. Patricia had made this personal when she threatened Zara. Now she was about to discover that threatening a military family means you're fighting someone who swore an oath to defend against all enemies, foreign and domestic. And I considered anyone who weaponized child protective services against a military orphan to be an enemy of everything I'd sworn to protect. David's text message arrived at 11:47 p.m. "Emergency. Meet me at Starbucks on Route 29. Come alone." I found him in the back corner booth, clutching a coffee cup with shaking hands and a manila envelope thick enough to contain a small novel. His face looked haggard, like a man who'd spent days wrestling with his conscience and finally reached a breaking point. "I can't sleep," he said without preamble as I sat down. "Haven't slept properly since our conversation. Every time I close my eyes, I see those families Patricia destroyed." "David, what's in the envelope?" "Everything." His voice was barely above a whisper. Financial records going back 2 years, email communications, board meeting recordings, contractor agreements, bank transfers, all of it. I reached for the envelope, but David held it back momentarily. "Before I give you this, I need you to understand something. What I found, it's worse than housing discrimination. Much worse." His military bearing was completely gone, replaced by the haunted expression of someone who'd discovered depths of corruption he never imagined possible. "Tell me." David opened the envelope and pulled out a thick stack of documents. Patricia isn't just working with Pinnacle Development, she's been systematically defrauding the HOA itself for over 18 months. The first document was a bank statement showing HOA account transfers, amounts ranging from $5,000 to $20,000 labeled as emergency maintenance and community enhancement projects. None of these projects exist, David continued. I physically drove to every address listed in these invoices. The landscaping improvements at 412 Maple Street, that house has been empty for 6 months. The security system upgrade at the community center never happened. My cybersecurity analyst mind immediately grasped the implications. She's been using fake invoices to steal HOA funds. $237,000 over 18 months, David's voice cracked. Money that should have gone to actual community improvements, maintenance reserves, and emergency funds. I flipped through more documents, finding a web of shell companies, fake contractor agreements, and fraudulent expense reports. Patricia had created an entire criminal enterprise using the HOA as her personal bank account. It gets worse, David said, pulling out a second stack of papers. She's been manipulating insurance claims too. Remember the hail damage to the community center roof last year? The $10,000 repair? Never happened. Patricia filed false claims with our insurance company, collected the payments, and pocketed the money. The roof was fine. David showed me photographs he'd taken of the pristine community center roof. She's been committing insurance fraud on top of everything else. The evidence was overwhelming. Patricia hadn't just been discriminating against military families, she'd been running a comprehensive criminal operation that defrauded the entire community. David, why are you showing me this now? Because she's accelerating her timeline. His voice took on the urgency of someone delivering critical intelligence. I was in the HOA office today when she got a call from someone at Pinnacle Development. They're concerned about your federal complaints and want to expedite the Thompson resolution. Meaning what? Meaning their planet. I started with financial flow analysis, using the same techniques I employed to track international cybercriminals. Patricia's shell companies formed a network designed to obscure money laundering, but she'd made critical errors in her digital footprint. Every fraudulent transaction had electronic records, bank transfers, email confirmations, digital invoices, payment authorizations. Patricia had created a comprehensive paper trail while believing she was covering her tracks. Using specialized forensic software, I mapped the complete financial network. Money flowed from the HOA accounts to Patricia's shell companies, then to her personal accounts, then to Pinnacle Development as consulting fees and property acquisition bonuses. The pattern was textbook money laundering disguised as legitimate business transactions. Next, I analyzed the communication evidence David had provided. Patricia's emails revealed the systematic nature of her discrimination campaign. But more importantly, they documented conspiracy to commit federal crimes. Her correspondence with Pinnacle Development explicitly discussed using housing discrimination to depress property values for profitable acquisition. They'd created written agreements detailing percentage-based payments for successful property seizures from military families. This wasn't opportunistic bias. It was premeditated criminal conspiracy. I compiled the insurance fraud evidence next, cross-referencing Patricia's false claims with actual community maintenance records. She'd filed 17 fraudulent insurance claims over 18 months, collecting payments for repairs that never occurred. Each false claim was a federal crime carrying potential prison sentences. But the most damning evidence was Patricia's systematic violation of fair housing laws. Using advanced data analysis, I documented her discriminatory enforcement patterns with mathematical precision. Military families received violations at a rate 340% higher than civilian families. Patricia's random inspections targeted military-owned properties 85% of the time. Her fee assessments disproportionately impacted service members by margins that made statistical discrimination undeniable. I created visualization charts showing the systematic nature of her targeting, making the discrimination visible to any prosecutor or jury. The technical challenge was ensuring all evidence would be admissible in federal court. Digital evidence requires proper authentication, chain of custody documentation, and technical certification of analysis methods. I documented every step of my investigation using forensic protocols, created cryptographic hashes of all digital files, and prepared technical testimony explaining my analysis methods to non-technical audiences. By 4 a.m., I had built 3 separate criminal cases. First, systematic housing discrimination under federal fair housing laws. Patricia's targeting of military families was documented, quantified, and legally actionable. The evidence showed deliberate conspiracy to violate civil rights through housing discrimination. Second, comprehensive financial fraud including embezzlement, money laundering, and insurance fraud. Patricia had stolen over $237,000 from the HOA while filing false insurance claims worth an additional $89,000. Third, conspiracy to commit mail fraud and wire fraud through her coordination with Pinnacle Development. Their written agreements to use systematic harassment for profitable property acquisition constituted federal racketeering activities. Each case was independently prosecutable, but together they painted a picture of systematic criminal enterprise that would ensure significant federal prison time. I encrypted the complete evidence package using military-grade cryptography and prepared multiple copies for different federal agencies. The FBI's Financial Crimes Division would handle the fraud charges. The Civil Rights Division would prosecute the housing discrimination. The Federal Trade Commission would address the consumer protection violations. But I also prepared something else, a comprehensive media package documenting Patricia's crimes in terms that local news organizations could understand and report. Sometimes public exposure accelerates federal investigations. The final element was protective documentation for every military family Patricia had targeted. I compiled evidence of their financial losses, documented the harassment they'd endured, and prepared civil rights complaints that would ensure they received compensation for damages. Patricia had spent months planning her systematic attack on military families. She'd researched our vulnerabilities, exploited our service commitments, and weaponized bureaucracy against people who'd sworn to defend the country. But she'd made one critical miscalculation. She'd targeted someone whose professional expertise was exposing exactly the kind of systematic criminal enterprise she was running. Tomorrow, I would begin implementing a plan that would end Patricia's criminal career and protect every military family in Oakwood Heights. She was about to discover that some battles choose the wrong enemy. I arrived at the FBI field office in Quantico at 8 a.m. sharp, carrying 3 encrypted drives and a briefcase full of authenticated documentation. My security clearance expedited the meeting process, and within 20 minutes I was sitting across from Special Agent Rebecca Martinez and her Financial Crimes Task Force. "Mr. Thompson, we've reviewed your preliminary evidence submission," Agent Martinez said, studying the chaos. A summary I'd prepared. "This appears to be a comprehensive criminal conspiracy with federal jurisdiction implications." I walked them through the evidence methodically, starting with the financial fraud component. Patricia Whitmore has embezzled $237,000 from the HOA through fake invoices and shell company transactions. Every transaction has digital records that trace directly to her personal accounts. Agent Martinez's partner, Agent Chen, pulled up the financial flowcharts on his laptop. "Your analysis shows systematic money laundering through multiple shell entities. How did you verify these companies don't exist?" Cross-referenced with state business registrations, federal tax records, and physical address verification. None of these companies have legitimate business operations. I provided detailed documentation of my verification process. And the insurance fraud? 17 false claims totaling $89,000 over 18 months. I have photographic evidence showing the claimed damages never occurred, along with Patricia's signed insurance forms stating the opposite. Agent Martinez made notes while Agent Chen continued reviewing my digital analysis. The housing discrimination evidence is particularly comprehensive. You've documented systematic targeting with statistical precision. 340% higher violation rates for military families, with documented evidence of deliberate targeting based on service member status. I pulled up the discrimination analysis charts. Every violation notice, every selective enforcement action, every discriminatory policy implementation is documented with timestamps and communication records. And you obtained this evidence how? Through authorized access provided by an HOA board member who became concerned about illegal activities. David Chen, the HOA treasurer, discovered the financial irregularities and provided access to investigate. Agent Martinez nodded. "We'll need to interview Mr. Chen separately. What about the conspiracy with Pinnacle Development?" I provided the encrypted communications between Patricia and James Morrison, showing their explicit coordination to use housing discrimination for property acquisition profits. They have written agreements detailing percentage-based payments for successful property seizures from military families. Agent Chen whistled softly as he read through the communications. They documented the entire conspiracy in writing. Patricia believed her encryption was secure. She didn't account for federal cybersecurity analysis capabilities. Agent Martinez leaned back in her chair. Mr. Thompson, this is exactly the kind of systematic civil rights violation the Department of Justice prioritizes. We're going to fast-track this investigation. What's the timeline? Financial crimes investigation starts immediately. We'll coordinate with the Civil Rights Division for the housing discrimination charges and with HUD for the fair housing violations. Agent Martinez stood up. We'll need search warrants for Patricia's office, home, and financial records. I can provide technical assistance for the digital forensics analysis. We may take you up on that given your clearance level and expertise. The meeting concluded with agents requesting additional documentation and scheduling interviews with David Chen and affected military families. I left Quantico confident that federal law enforcement was taking Patricia's crimes seriously. But federal investigations still take time, and I knew Patricia was planning to escalate her attacks on my family within days. My next stop was the local FBI office in Fairfax, where I filed a separate complaint about Patricia's attempt to weaponize Child Protective Services. Using CPS to harass military families constituted federal civil rights violations under color of authority. Then I drove to the offices of Channel 7 News, where investigative reporter Jennifer Walsh had built a reputation for exposing local corruption. I provided her with a media-friendly version of the evidence, focusing on the human impact of Patricia's crimes on military families. This is a major story, Jennifer said after reviewing the documentation. Systematic housing discrimination against military families combined with financial fraud. When can we go public? Give federal investigators 48 hours to secure their evidence, then expose everything. My final stop was the Virginia Attorney General's office, where I filed state-level complaints for fraud, embezzlement, and violations of Virginia's fair housing laws. By 6 p.m., I had initiated investigations at 4 different levels: federal civil rights, federal financial crimes, state criminal prosecution, and public media exposure. Patricia's criminal enterprise was about to face coordinated attack from multiple directions simultaneously. Tomorrow morning, I would implement the final phase of my plan, a public confrontation that would force Patricia to defend her actions in front of the entire community while federal agents executed search warrants. The call came at 6:30 a.m. Agent Martinez's voice carried the crisp efficiency of someone executing a coordinated federal operation. Mr. Thompson, we've obtained search warrants for Patricia Whitmore's residence, HOA office, and financial records. We're executing them this morning at 9 a.m. Can you be available to provide technical assistance? Absolutely. I was already dressed and preparing for what I knew would be the decisive day in this battle. We'll also need you at the HOA office to help identify digital evidence and explain the financial systems. This is going to be a multi-agency operation: FBI, HUD investigators, and IRS Criminal Division. After hanging up, I texted David Chen. Federal agents executing search warrants today at 9 a.m. Emergency HOA board meeting needs to be called for this afternoon. Time to expose everything to the community. His response was immediate. Already done. Board meeting scheduled for 2 p.m. All homeowners notified. Patricia doesn't know yet. I spent the morning at Patricia's HOA office, watching federal agents methodically dismantle her criminal operation. Agent Martinez's team seized computers, financial records, communication devices, and filing cabinets full of fraudulent documentation. Mr. Thompson, can you explain this financial software system? Agent Chen pointed to Patricia's computer screen, which displayed the shell company accounting program she'd used to launder HOA funds. I walked them through Patricia's digital infrastructure, explaining how she'd created fake invoices, processed fraudulent payments, and transferred stolen funds through her network of shell companies. Every click generated digital evidence that would be admissible in federal court. She was sophisticated enough to use encryption and shell companies, but not sophisticated enough to avoid leaving digital fingerprints, I explained, as agents documented each fraudulent transaction. By noon, federal investigators had loaded 3 vehicles with evidence documenting Patricia's systematic criminal enterprise. HUD investigators had found additional evidence of fair housing violations, while IRS agents discovered tax evasion related to her unreported income from the fraud schemes. Agent Martinez approached me as the evidence collection concluded. Mr. Thompson, we have enough evidence to arrest Patricia immediately, but we understand there's a community meeting this afternoon? The homeowners deserve to see the evidence before she's arrested. Many of them supported her policies without understanding they were supporting criminal activity. We'll have agents positioned at the meeting. If she attempts to flee or destroy evidence, we'll intervene immediately. At 1:30 p.m., I arrived at the Oakwood Heights Coast Unity Center to find the parking lot completely full. Word had spread beyond the official HOA notification. This was the kind of community drama that drew crowds. Inside, every seat was occupied, with additional residents standing along the walls. I recognized military families Patricia had targeted, civilian families who'd been confused by her policies, and community members who'd simply heard rumors about federal investigations. David Chen stood at the front of the room, visibly nervous but determined. Patricia sat at the board table, her usual confidence replaced by barely concealed panic. She'd clearly heard about the morning's search warrants. At exactly 2 p.m., David called the meeting to order. Before we begin regular business, I need to address serious concerns about HOA management and financial irregularities. Patricia immediately stood up. David, this is highly irregular. Board business should be conducted through proper channels. Sit down, Patricia. David's voice carried military authority I'd never heard from him before. The community deserves to know how their HOA president has been systematically defrauding them while targeting military families for discriminatory harassment. A murmur rippled through the crowd as residents realized this wasn't a routine board meeting. I stood up from my seat in the audience. I have evidence that Patricia Whitmore has committed federal crimes against this community and specifically against military families. Patricia's face went white. This is completely inappropriate. I demand this meeting be adjourned immediately. You can demand whatever you want, David replied calmly. But the FBI, HOD, and IRS have already executed search warrants on your office and residence this morning. The evidence has been secured. The room erupted in shocked conversations as the implications sank in. Patricia looked toward the exit. But I noticed 2 men in suits positioned near both doors, federal agents ensuring she couldn't flee. It was time to present the evidence that would end Patricia's criminal career and protect every military family in Oakwood Heights. 6 months later, I stood in the same community center where Patricia had been arrested, but the atmosphere couldn't have been more different. The room buzzed with positive energy as families celebrated the first annual Oakwood Heights Military Appreciation Day, an event that would have been impossible under Patricia's discriminatory regime. The transformation had been remarkable. Using the recovered funds from Patricia's embezzlement, we'd implemented actual community improvements, a new playground honoring military families, upgraded pool facilities with accessibility features, and a community garden where neighbors worked together regardless of their service background. Uncle Marcus, look! Zara ran up to me, proudly wearing her military dependent ID on a lanyard, no longer a source of shame or intimidation, but a symbol of honor in a community that finally understood its meaning. The legal outcomes had exceeded even my expectations. Patricia received a federal sentence of 8 years in prison for housing discrimination, mail fraud, wire fraud, and embezzlement. Pinnacle Development faced federal RICO charges, and James Morrison received his own prison sentence for conspiracy to violate civil rights. More importantly, every military family Patricia had targeted received compensation for their financial losses and damages. The Rodriguez family recovered the equity they'd lost when forced to sell below market value. The Washington family received damages for the emotional distress Patricia's harassment had caused their children. David Chen approached me as I watched families enjoying the community cookout. The board meeting went well today, unanimous approval for the new anti-discrimination policies. And the federal oversight? HUD is satisfied with our compliance measures. The consent decree will be lifted next year. David's transformation had been as remarkable as the community's. He'd become a passionate advocate for military families, using his financial expertise to ensure transparent HOA management. What struck me most was how the community had rallied around military families once they understood the systematic targeting we'd endured. Civilian neighbors who had previously been indifferent to Patricia's policies became active supporters of inclusive community values. Mrs. Peterson, an elderly resident who had initially supported Patricia's security measures, now volunteered at the Military Family Support Fund we'd established. I'm ashamed I didn't see what was happening, she'd told me weeks earlier, but I want to make sure it never happens again. The ripple effects extended beyond Oakwood Heights. My case had become a model for other communities dealing with systematic discrimination. Federal investigators used our evidence collection methods as a template for similar investigations nationwide. Local news coverage had exposed the broader problem of HOA abuse, leading to state legislation strengthening oversight of homeowners associations and protecting military families from discriminatory targeting. But the most meaningful victory was personal. Zara had thrived in an environment where her military heritage was celebrated rather than stigmatized. She'd made friends with children from both military and civilian families, building the kind of integrated community my brother had envisioned when he bought our house. "Uncle Marcus, are you coming to the pool?" she asked, already heading toward the water where kids were playing together, without regard for their parents' career backgrounds. "I'll be right there." I took a moment to reflect on the battle we'd fought and won. Patricia's systematic targeting had seemed insurmountable when it began, a lone military family against an established power structure designed to intimidate and exclude us. But expertise, persistence, and community support had prevailed over corruption and discrimination. My cybersecurity background had provided the tools needed to expose Patricia's crimes, but the community's response had provided the moral authority to ensure lasting change. The memorial garden my brother had planted still bloomed in our backyard, but now it was part of a community that truly honored military service rather than merely tolerating it. Military families belonged in Oakwood Heights, not as grudgingly accepted residents, but as valued community members whose service was recognized and respected. Walking toward the pool where Zara waited, I passed the new community memorial honoring military families, a permanent reminder that discrimination has no place in neighborhoods where people understand the sacrifices made to protect our freedoms. Patricia's criminal enterprise had been dismantled completely. Military families were protected by federal oversight and community support. The systematic targeting had been replaced by systematic inclusion. Justice had been served, but more importantly, a community had been healed. If you want more stories of homeowners standing up to HOA tyranny, hit subscribe right now, share your story in the comments, and let me know where you're watching from. Together, we can ensure that no family faces systematic discrimination without the tools and support needed to fight back.